Hi guys, Tia here, and thanks for dropping by and watching my video. So today we're going to be talking about Arena Run again in Hearthstone. Now this is a bit different from the initial guide that I made before, which is the Arena guide. That guide basically talked about selecting cards in Arena. So in this version of the guide, I'm going to be talking about a few strategies or a few tips that I can give you on how you play Arena runs. Now, hopefully this helps you out. There are just going to be around four tips that I can provide, but more or less, these should be more than enough to give you at least a good perspective on how should you actually be playing your arena runs. All right, so let's get on to it. So the first thing that you need to think about when you're playing arena is that you have to play it like the way you play a ranked game. Now, what do I mean by this? In ranked game, normally you would expect certain specific decks. Let's say, for example, the tier list that I have here are tier 1, tier 2 deck lists that are, commonly used when you're playing ranked game, and most people that you fight against will have these kinds of decks. So pretty much when you're playing those types of games, you would be pretty much aware, okay, I'm fighting against a control mage, oh, I'm fighting against a Murloc Paladin. So it's a basic idea that okay, I pretty much expect that this is what he's gonna do, this is what this deck is capable of, so you know the potential of the deck. Now in Arena it's a bit more complex than that because Arena is made from random selected cards. So you can't really expect them to have Control Mage, you can't expect them to have Pirate Warriors, right? But the thing here is that you can at least play around with what the class is capable of. So as you can see, the classes, what their abilities are. Like for example, mages and druids and paladins, you know that they have some level of hard removals or some level of board clears and what their hero powers are capable of. Since you can't predict what exactly they have in their deck, but at least you know that these kinds of classes have these kinds of specific cards. So those are the things that you need to play around with. So that's how you're going to be playing your arena runs. You think that, let's say, for example, the mage. If you look at a mage, what is the mage capable of? So potentially, what are the cards that these mage classes can have in their deck? Now, main reason, and I guess the best reason why the mage is always tagged as one of the top tier classes when you're playing arena is because of the spells that they have. They have so many removals, they have so many board control or board clear cards that they can control the board pretty much anytime they want. Now, of course, that's not always the case. Some may just tend to be unlucky that they won't have some of these cards. So, for example, the cards that I provided here for Mage is that these are some of the strong AoE cards that they have and strong removal cards that they would more or less have. Meteor can be a bit more scarce to see, but Flame Strike, Fire Lance Portal, Fireball, Volcanic Potion, Frostbolt, Blizzard, Polymorph, these things are more common compared to Meteor, but these things can destroy your deck, destroy your board control, So you have to always consider these types of cards that the mage may have. But of course, when you're playing along the game, midway through maybe, or halfway through the game, then more or less you should have at least an idea that, does the mage have this kind of spell? Does the mage have this kind of removal? It's a bit more complex, but at least when you're playing the game, you always assume that if you're fighting a mage, these are the cards that you need to be a bit aware of. And for example, for Rogue, then you need to be aware of these specific cards. Rogue doesn't really have a very good board clear per se, but they do have a lot of good removal cards. So the best card for me at the moment when they released the Angora deck, they have the Envenom Weapon and the Vile Spine Slayer. Now the sad thing is that Vile Spine Slayer is an epic card, so it's not commonly seen in the arena scenario. But if they do get it, then that this card can destroy you. So that's why Rogue can be a bit dangerous. So if they have Envenom Weapon or Vile Spine Slayer or Assassinate, then that kind of wrecks you. And always take note that when you're fighting against Rogue, you always assume that they may have betrayal. Betrayal can actually destroy you too if you put your cards in the wrong position. So you have to take note of these cards when you're fighting against Rogue. For Paladin, of course, what you expect, the two new cards that are actually dominating the arena runs is Spike Reach Steed and Dino Size. Dino Size is not as common, but Spike Reach Steed, pretty much you'll see it almost every single game you fight against Paladins. It's a must pick for them. So you got to be careful with that. If you can eliminate the board, you can clear the board as much as you can do so. Otherwise, you may potentially get punished by a simple recruit that can be dynasized to a 10-10, then you're pretty much in a bad position. Now, another thing that's good about Paladins is that they have, three different weapons that they can use, which can actually do very good trade-offs. So you got to be careful with those too. So those are the three main classes that I just want to talk about when it comes to strong board control. The other classes also have their own ways of dealing the board, but these top three classes are normally always in the top tier in terms of arena runs. So these are the types of classes that you would normally encounter in the game. So just take note of these cards whenever you're fighting against them, but be most wary about the common cards because those are, this tendency that they will have them compared to the rare ones and the epic ones. Right, so tip number two, get rid of snowball cards. So what do I mean by snowball cards? So good example cards that I have here would be Vicious Fledgling, Raging Worgen, Daring Reporter, Grime Street Enforcer. Why do we say these cards are snowball cards? Vicious Fledgling. Basically, if you just look at the description, after this minion attacks a hero, adapt. That's very scary because if the fledgling manages to hit your face and gets Wind Fury and hits your face again, it can get maybe, oh, I don't know, plus 3 damage, plus 3 health, then or plus 1 health, or it can get the, what do you call this? There cannot be targeted character or something like that. Then you're in a in a very bad position because if you're at the turn 3, then you have a vicious fledgling that turns into a 3/6, then that's gonna be very difficult to deal with. So you need to get rid of it if you can, but if not, then you're in a very bad position, and chances are you may get snowballed and lose the game. Same goes for Raging Organ. Just Raging Organ is much easier to get rid of. It's just that it has Wind Fury, and if you manage to encounter this one and its Wind Fury is triggered, then and you can't remove it, then you're pretty much in a bad, you're also in a bad position. So another good card here is the Grime Street Enforcer. So I recently encountered this card against when I was playing against a Paladin. Then I didn't manage to kill the Grime Street Enforcer, so I got snowballed in a sense that it managed to buff at least 3 or 4 times all of the other cards that he had on his hand. And afterwards, I could not just do anything anymore. I couldn't get rid of the Grime Street Enforcer because he had taunt after taunt after taunt. I couldn't do anything about it, and that basically lost me the game. So you gotta be careful with these cards. If you can get rid of them, try to get rid of them as soon as you can. But the main tip here is like, for example, if you have these cards on your hand, the best time to drop them would be if the board is empty. If the board is empty, drop these cards, then there's a better chance for you to actually have them snowball. But of course, don't expect them, maybe 80% of the time the enemy would be able to get rid of these cards. So that's just a tip. Hopefully hopefully this helped out. So the third tip I would mention here is know when to trade or hit face. Now, this concept can be a bit more difficult to work around it because this decision making really depends on the situation. It depends on what exactly do you have on the board and what does the enemy have on the board. So it can sway your decision making in terms of should I trade or not. So I put a good example here. Let's say, for example, if you have a Scarlet Crusader, then your enemy dropped a Crackling Razor Maw, then of course chances are you will trade with it. Why? Because you have a Scarlet Crusader that has Divine Shield. You're not gonna waste a Divine Shield if you're not gonna trade with it with anything on it, right? So you trade with the Crackling Razor Maw. Now, if you don't trade with it, it can fire back at you, maybe because the enemy finds let's say those hound masters that can buff this minion to a 5/4, then your Scarlet Crusader can no longer trade with it. Normally, if you have a Divine Shield minion, you would tend to try to trade with it, or try to trade with another minion. Now, if you're fighting against a Harvest Golem, of course, definitely trade with it. The only downside here is that in the next turn, the damage golem will be able to destroy the Scarlet Crusader. Now let's say, for example, you dropped a friendly bartender. Then the enemy drop a Razor Maw, then of course trade with it. Otherwise you will face, of course, a potential setback if the enemy manages to find a way to destroy your friendly bartender. But let's say, for example, if you're faced with a Harvest Golem and a friendly bartender, there's no way for you to kill the Harvest Golem unless you have a hero power that can actually deal 1 damage to the Harvest Golem, or if you have another card that can deal with the Harvest Golem, then yes, go ahead, trade with it. But by default, you don't trade with it, you just hit face. Unless you're sure that you can kill the Harvest Golem. If not, just trade face. That would be the best option that you can get. If you're faced with a taunt that can destroy your friendly bartender, normally you wouldn't just trade it in. You would just let it stand there and just end your turn, or find another minion that you can drop on the board, then end your turn. Alright, so that's just the basic idea. It's really difficult, as I've said, to do an actual sample, but hopefully this helps you out. Now, the next thing that you would always want to look into is your card advantage. You always need to count how much cards do you have in your hand versus how many cards your enemy has in his hand. You need to be always aware of it, because sometimes when you get so into the game, you don't even realize that you're running out of cards. You're not trading well. That means that the enemy might be dropping a lot of quality cards. Let's say, for example, a Scarlet Crusader that can trade maybe 1 to 2 cards potentially. Then that can be a bit of a problem. Then that means that either you're not, thinking straight, you're not thinking well on how you want to play your deck, or the enemy just tends to have really good cards that you have no choice or no way to deal with, then you have to trade it in. Then you start losing your card advantage, and eventually you run out of cards. So be careful with that and always be aware of it. All right, so just a quick recap on the strategy or tips that I've mentioned. So first off, treat the game like the way you would treat ranked. Know the cards, familiarize yourself what are the removals that these types of classes have. Of course, don't just stick with the classes that I've listed there, so Mage, Paladin, and Rogue. There are also 6 other classes that you need to look into when you're fighting against them. Awareness on what your enemies can potentially do is very important when you're playing arena runs and the rank games. So second tip, of course, just get rid of all the snowball cards that can potentially destroy you or take over the game. Then of course, know when to trade or when to hit face. Then most importantly, always make sure that you're at an advantage in terms of number of cards in your hand. Now that will not always be the case, but always make sure that when you're doing your trades, you know that there are some follow-ups that you can do to counter if in case you get countered by your enemy. Now, of course, it's not always going to be the same. It's not always going to be possible to counter your enemy, but that's just how the game plays. So you can potentially lose from that, but that's just how it goes. All right, so hopefully this guide helped you out. It's very short. It's just only 4 tips. But I do feel that these tips pretty much cover everything that you need to think about when you're playing the arena runs in Hearthstone. So hope you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, then there's a dislike button there that you can press, but if you did, then please press the like button. And again, thanks for watching the video, and hope to see you guys again next time. TR out.